Hello. It's just me at the moment, but Chris has assured me that he is going to be on his way. So today, the main topic of conversation is apparently Defense Against the Dark Arts is what we were going to be calling this one. Really is about talking about, is there such a thing as a class called Defense Against the Dark Arts? How is it taught? Is it taught properly? Is it not taught properly? Is it like a magical equivalent of a self-defense class? How is this traditionally taught? And what would you be expected to master on a Defense Against the Dark Arts class? The Fausty Witches, which I am told is officially here. There he is. Wow. Hello, Fausty Witch.
Hi, Liam. Sorry, you just lost me completely. Carry on. Mid-sentence you were.
I was just going to say, I want to talk a little bit about the teaching of Defense Against the Dark Arts, because we've talked a little bit before about how one might protect themselves. But I think the journey of learning that type of magic and how to, I think, avoid instances where you might be taught it wrong, or basically really shit teachers is what I'm trying to say in a roundabout way. So if traditionally everyone believed in magic throughout the ancient world and throughout medieval period, that kind of thing, then clearly magic exists, therefore bad things exist. And there's a lot of kind of surviving means that you can look at, such as the evil eye, the Nazar, the hand of Fatima, all of that kind of thing, little trinkets essentially, and superstitious things that might be used to ward off evil. In fact, looking up the correspondences and uses for a lot of plants, herbs, and things with magic, very often an awful lot of them is wards against evil, protects, all that kind of thing. So much stuff is said to protect against evil that there must be a lot of worries about evil, about defending yourself against bad magic, essentially. So with that being said, the plebs might use such things, but what about the upper echelons of the magical community? What do you think they did? How do you think they approached the subject in the great mystery schools or in the great cults and so on and so forth? Because it wasn't like in like Hogwarts, is it, where they literally have kind of like how a schooling system works these days?
Well, no. And obviously you would be schooled in whatever was specific to the temple complex or whatever mystery system you were in. So you're dealing with a very specific curriculum. Obviously, there would have been covered basics across the board. So, you know, it wouldn't be like nowadays where you have to pick some shitty book by Cunningham up and then expect to have some kind of basic understanding of what's going on. You know, we're talking about actual practice where they'd have been taught to a very decent level. Before they're even allowed to kind of take their vows, as it were, actually, potentially even watch the mysteries, they'd have actually have had to have reached a particular level before that could happen. So, you know, you are talking about a very different class of practitioner. So with this, it is a case of going, okay. You know, these were high-level practitioners before they were even getting somewhere. But also they lived and breathed it. So it's not like us where we've got other jobs and other responsibilities. And, you know, most super witches, any kind of witch we've met, will have had, you know, families to look after, etc., etc. If you entered into one of these, one of these mystery schools as full-time, you would have literally lived and breathed it. It was what you did from when you woke up to when you went to bed, and possibly even while you were sleeping. depending on the types of, depending on what deity work, which deities or pantheons you were dealing with at the time. So, there were kind of, the full-time and the part-timers of these kind of societal arrangement for mystery schools. So, there's a lot going on. And I just realized I gave lots of background there and didn't actually answer your question. So defense from that point of view, you're dealing with it from a completely different avenue. One, you'd have guaranteed that you'd actually got proper management and proper guaranteed protection, shall we say, from the deities they were working with, because these were, we don't use devotion very much as the subject we talk about, Liam. Let's say we normally avoid talking about devotion if we can help it. But in these kind of settings, that's giving you a level of protection that you're probably not used to if you were to talk about kind of modern practice. These are the sorts of devotees that myths were written about, as this kind of, moments in time where certain devotees have been protected by said deity. Like it's part of the mythology for a reason. This is how the level of practice was. You were best friends. Like, we joke about having kind of revolving doors of deities coming in and out that we work with on a professional level. This is you are family. Kind of a mob boss kind of situation. You are sold, blood in, blood out. You are protected as one of the family. So actually, I would imagine beyond the plebs, you wouldn't have required protection in that sense. It would have been how good you practice, how good you are at the types of magic that you're expected to understand and practice. And therefore, being black belted in love magic is very different to being black magic in, cursing and shit. So, but you'd have had a good enough knowledge of all to prepare for anything, but you were protected. So I don't know if that's really helped, but I feel like I've given you more of a history lesson than I have actually answered your question, Liam.
Okay, so if I take what you've said and I try and condense it, because that's what I do. Traditionally, your independently kind versions of witches, you're talking about people that have folk magical practitioners, and they would rely on superstitious forms of folk magic for basic protection. They didn't necessarily understand things like disease and that. So there was a pretty much bad spirits and bad juju going about all the time that would just be blamed on that. Even if it was problems with viruses and diseases and bacteria and whatever else. The upper echelons, or what would be considered to be the upper echelons, the big magical societies, mystery schools and the like, they're structured. So with that, you're talking about a big machine, and people are trained to be cogs within that machine. So you would be trained for presumably a specific role, and then perhaps you might go up and up and up a level. But there's a big difference between today and that, because from my perspective, and I don't know if you agree with this, today, much of the types of organizations that you would get back then, the mystery schools, so on and so forth, if you compare those to today's secret societies and covens, is hardly even a comparison. They're not really particularly sophisticated or big or powerful organizations a lot of the time. And the ones that are tend not to be all that magical. They might use magic, but there's not really the pursuit of magic that they're dealing with.
It's more of a branch than the core.
But the everyday magical practitioner, because of the Western society that we come from, I'm really talking about Western culture here, it's seen as education for you to stand on your own 2 feet. So witchcraft and witches nowadays are kind of seen as you train to be a doctor. You train various types of medicine, various types of biological and chemistry and all of that sort of stuff to become a doctor. And you get at that level, and then you have a medical license and so on and so forth, and then your training really starts happening. Nowadays we kind of see it as, because I think of the way in which we're taught in general in the Western world, that there's a kind of schooling system and graduation that you have to be an all-rounder. Now, in the psychic world, psychic fairs and the like, we know that's not true, because psychics are shit. Let's be fair. Most psychics are shit. They're not all-rounders. They sometimes will go to psychic schools, or they'll go to whatever the next level down of that is, spirit church, spiritualist church, that kind of thing. And they'll learn psychic work. They might learn a bit of basic protective work and measures, but is mainly reliant to their, revolves around their job. It's not really all-round magic. The idea of something like from sci-fi, fantasy, that kind of thing, J.K. Rowling's World of Hogwarts, that's a magic school that gets you to a certain level all round, doesn't it? They have all of these different areas that you're supposed to graduate from in order to be a fully fledged functional witch in everyday society. We have the schooling system, which is apparently, I know this is a bit of a joke, apparently is supposed to turn you into someone that contributes
A rounded
to
individual
and can cope. Obviously, we know that it doesn't do a particularly good job at that, but it does better than a lot of the alternatives in other countries, at least. But yeah, I mean, this idea of defense against the dark arts, classically being taught if you were in an organization that specialized in a fucking about with magic and screwing people over, a darker kind of cult, say, then that might be a big part of your training. In the modern day, I see it off of the curriculum of a lot of these would-be magic schools that are out and about, and that being replaced with people saying, well, if you do bad things, defense against the dark arts, all you need to do is transmute energy. As soon as you've learned how to transmute energy, you're protected. Which, of course, we know that that's bullshit, don't we?
Yeah. It's only going to protect you against the basics, which I think we covered in Fortress of Protection, or something we called a previous episode of Fausty. But there is that kind of need of understanding beyond that. And actually, if you're just dealing with other witches that were learnt the same thing, then sure, you play magical tennis, which is essentially what that essentially is bouncing back and reflecting energy back at the sender, and then ping-ponging your way around for the rest of the year, while you both aren't capable of powering up to the next level where you use it. At that point, we're then talking about transmutation, at which point you're absorbing certain amounts of blows. But then if you were to actually then encounter a witch a level beyond that, where they've gone beyond that and they're starting to do kind of, I went to say high magic then, but kind of soul level magic, where someone is attacking at a level that is not within the rounds of physics and is not within your normal everyday world, and is actually on energetic levels, that is then starting to mess with potentially the structure of your spirit, and are you capable of defending against those sorts of attacks? Are you capable of dealing with a small legion of manufactured spirits that slowly eat away at you from the inside out? Are you actually prepared for dealing with that kind of work? So, this is where we're starting to talk about kind of higher level defense against dark arts kind of situation, where you're talking about, witches that actually know what they're doing, attacking each other, or not even necessarily attacking each other, but taking on, say, a small group of mundanes that are not aware that they're slowly being eaten alive. And then at that point, going down to see your local psychic is not going to necessarily help you. At that point,
She's
you are
gonna
going
say, the cards tell me you're fucked, and that fate is sealed. That's what she's gonna tell you.
Yeah. And she's going to struggle to be able to tell you beyond that. That's not down to her lack of ability. That is down to her lack of training, which is often what we, what we're talking about. We're not just dissing psychics just for the sake of it. It is the way in which we are trained these days. Well, Liam might be, but actually, what we're generally talking about there is the way in which people are schooled in the psychic arts these days. That is kind of the problem. It only deals with that kind of, at very best, that first astral level. So if you were talking about high magics and the way that we normally do, and breaking it into the planetary systems, that's not even really left our planet. That you're talking about that first kind of hole there, the astral within the moon space, is literally not even really left the laws of physics. So it's kind of that kind of gray area around, not even really left beyond planet. And obviously, even someone that's done very basic work around the solar system realize quite how big we are, and therefore if that's as far as you're able to go, you're not even really stretching the entire of the solar system we're in, let alone anywhere near understanding the universe, or at least being able to manipulate. Because obviously this is what's talked about, even basic insta witches talk about manifestation. Well, that manifestation we were talking about earlier, Liam, is obviously including more planets than just the moon.
More than just the psychic.
More than just the psychic part of actually, in order to form that triangle of manifestation. Anyway, we've already got questions.
So Alex says, that's why I stopped going to tarot readers. They always tell you the obvious. The same thing happens when I do my own readings. Yeah, that's because that is... there are many ways to see the future. I'm presuming we're talking about seeing the future. There are many ways to see the future. Some are better than others in that they give you more detail. However, some work on different levels entirely. So if you're on this level and the change that's required to change the outcome is at this level, your method of seeing the future, if it operates on this level, is unable to see any changes that are not at this level or below. So when you talk about fates and gods and that kind of thing, the will of the gods, then there will be such a thing as people saying fate is sealed. Well, it may be beyond your ability to change the outcome, but that doesn't mean that the outcome cannot change. But that might be something for an entirely different show. What about, I'm presuming that means Lord of the Rings take on magical events versus Harry Potter's, like the battle between Saruman and Gandalf.
White Wizard.
Oh, right, okay. Right. I'm not really all that great with Lord of the Rings, if I'm honest. I'm presuming that's a goodie and a baddie.
Do you want me to break it down?
Is that the two wizards and one of them kills Gandalf and then Gandalf comes back by changing colour? Is that right?
Yeah, that bit.
Okay, all right.
He evolves, Liam. He evolves.
Oh, he evolves. Okay.
Well, one, I'm going to add something in there just because Liam won't be able to answer that bit, but he'll make more sense. Liam will will be able to answer it once I've said this, which is
Okay.
one, wizards in Lord of the Rings, for starters, aren't wizards. It's a kind of fae situation. So you're dealing with essentially a set of demigods, for lack of a better
Well, I
word.
thought they were like angels, aren't they? Aren't they like
To transfer,
archangels that take a
no,
limited form but don't really get
yeah,
involved?
they do take a limited form, but they have pre-programmed kind of evolutions available to
Right.
them. So they've kind of watered down their energy in order to exist in Middle Earth.
Right.
They're kind of envoys. So hence why I kind of said more fae rather than archangels, based on the fact that they don't follow necessarily the same set of rules
Right.
as you know, whereas at least with archangels they exist within the same paradigm. Whereas I get the impression Tolkien's actually drawing in from the kind of his understanding of things like fae. So yeah, so to me that would be very different to understanding how the Harry Potter universe works, which is all about wizards and actually about, you know, manipulating laws of physics and kind of manifestation. Whereas the sorts of magic that you're talking about in Lord of the Rings is more about one entity trying to take on another in its limited capacity within. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So
Yeah.
with the Harry Potter universe, it's about spells and shit, but you utilize spells that do a certain thing, and then you use
Who's the
your
smartest?
ingenuity to best an opponent. Whereas the rules kind of are already set in stone to a certain extent, presumably in the Lord of the Rings thing. Because if it's a case of this spirit is a level 5, this spirit is a level 6, 6
Yeah.
will always be a level 5 type thing.
Yeah.
Presumably. Right, okay, I get you now.
So
Similar to the real world, then, if you
yes.
combine both of them together.
Yeah. So really good point, Alex. It kind of allows us to say what we're talking about here is more a case of when you're getting to the higher echelons of practice, that's what you're then testing, is a mixture of who's the smartest and who has the most power. And at that point, the limitations are what you're capable of generating and pulling in from other sources, but also at what level you're able to access the different spiritual bodies that you have. If you only have access to so many of them, you either need to be really clever or be able to pull in extra power from somewhere else. So that's, which is very different to the kind of Harry Potter universe. Whereas up to a certain level, you're still very much dealing with the Harry Potter shit. So, you know, who's smarter than the other one, who's actually knows the better spells, that sort of thing, which seems rather petty. That's kind of from the kind of mundane level until you kind of what we would start. I guess that kind of starts at the top of the what we call a foundation in magic. So as you break into that intermediate stuff, that's when you're starting to kind of, oh, that's a level 7 over there, I best not piss him off kind of situation, which you don't really get, I think, in kind of foundational level magics.
You don't get lower. But yeah. Okay, so defense against the dark arts then. How does it often get taught in modern times? Because I've heard several associate experts on the subject talk about this and lecture it. And they take an interesting perspective that you should try and diffuse the situation, and it all becomes morally unethical. There's no point in doing it. Don't do it. None of the big boys and girls do that kind of thing, so you've got no need to worry. And I've heard this spoken in martial arts. In fact, I had this conversation with someone the other day when there's a rule that is fairly flawed. It is flawed, but it is something that is kind of a thing. They say any actual if you get into a fight on a street out in town or whatever, it won't be with a trained fighter, because all the people that have dedicated their lives to actually training in the system generally feel confident enough not to start going picking fights with people. So it's normally some idiot with something to prove. Now, it kind of does seem like it rings true, because that is to a certain extent true. And yeah, there are a lot of people out there that like to throw their weight around because, well, many reasons, presumably, you know. And the sort of people that start fights with others are like that. But at the same time, what you also need to remember is there are such a thing as mercenaries. There are such a thing as people that will literally train in a system so that they have power over other people. So there are trained fighters out there that will just murder people for the sake of murdering them. You know, that kind of thing. So it's flawed. It's one of those things that the vast majority of times, if you were to get into a fight, it would be with one of these people with little man syndrome or something, no doubt, that's had too many pints they can't handle and wants to throw a punch to prove something. But every now and then you would potentially meet someone that was a bit of a badass and could wipe the floor because they're a trained fighter. In the magical world, I see this as it's very similar. Most of the problems that you'll come across, whether it's other magical practitioners working against you, or whether it's spirits and the like working against you, then they're going to be beginners and basic, because most of the people with any real knowledge that are advancing have serious big projects that they're getting on with, and you're not of interest enough to them to go out of their way to, you know, if there's a spider in the house, I might squash it. If there's a spider a couple of roads away, I'm not going to be taking the time to go to a couple of roads and squash that spider just because it's there. Similar said, if you're getting smited by some big powerful spirit or magical practitioner, it's going to be because you're in their way. And the easiest thing for them to do is to brush you aside because they care nothing about you, you know, which doesn't happen that often, because the vast majority of magical practitioners that are beginners, they ain't going to be doing anything that's going to get in someone of that caliber's way. So they haven't really got a huge amount to worry about, you know. There are a couple of exceptions because some people are sickos, but in general, that is the case. However, most of these defense against the dark arts magical classes and the like don't teach that if you do encounter someone that is considerably has more of a foundation, has more than a foundation knowledge of magic, or let's be fair, has a foundation level of magic instead of just pre-foundational, they are going to fucking wipe the floor with you in ways that you can't even understand. So you're not going to be able to defend against it ultimately unless you have help from spirits or from other magical folk, whatever. If you pick a fight with someone that's trained in a bigger weight class than you, you are fucked. That's what they don't teach in defense against the dark arts classes. Now, does that mean that they're useless? No, it doesn't mean that they're useless. And I think from our perspective, although we teach protection and stuff like that, is from a practical perspective. It's from a, you will encounter this, so you need to defend against it. You will encounter that, so we'll teach you how to deal with it. When it gets past a certain level, the specialities, I suppose, of magic kind of wash away. Like in science, they say everything is physics past a certain point. Because, yeah, there's chemistry and biology in that, but physics is the general understanding of all things underneath that. So, in general, when you're talking about defending against something or attacking someone, it's about how smart you are, how outside of the box you can go. So, really, the only way to defend against that is to be smarter than the opponent. And I think a big thing that I know I've personally emphasized is not going out of your way to bring about someone or something trying to smite you or whatever it is in the first place. So don't piss people and things off, and they won't even bother to attempt. That being said, much like martial arts, it's a wonderful thing to train in, and it teaches many, many different things. The introductory courses, there's introductory courses in love magic, money magic, spellcasting, all of this, but a lot of them go on the basic principles. Once you understand one, you can technically apply those principles to others. Much like if you're really interested in offensive or defensive magic, you will learn techniques within that, and you'll have to progress magically a certain extent with certain things that are transferable to many other different areas of magic, which again, I don't think people fully understand.
At the end of the day, once magic gets past a certain point, it's like anything. It becomes a vocation. At that point, you're living it. At which point, your interactions with it are no longer one note. It slots into all parts of your life and goes without effort. What I think people forget to do, which I think we covered briefly in the Fortress of Protection episode, but just to kind of re-gloss that, of the fact that actually at that point you're just trying not to get noticed. Practice whatever you want to practice, and you don't want to be bothered by others. You might want to go and have a chat with other witches and then start getting interested in things like moots and stuff, where you kind of want to have that conversation to kind of see if there's a new perspective that you can kind of enjoy, or trigger a new way of thinking about your preferred subject. I think, but it becomes that, doesn't it? It becomes a group of people, a group of specialities, in the sense that you don't actually need them anymore, but you have a direct pathway that you like to work at. And obviously this is way beyond the kind of what we talked about in a recent podcast, which was, this what kind of witch are you? Hashtag. Kind of, it's way beyond that. What we're talking about is I'm taking this pantheon to the next level of what's available, or I have a complete project to see if I can build a micro universe and then turn it inside out. Like, these are the sorts of level projects we're talking about. We're not kind of going, those little, do you remember those kind of fortune teller things?
Yeah.
Pick a color. Oh, he loves you. It's not this kind of level.
Pick a number. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. Pick a color. Yeah. Red. Sorry, it's not supposed to be. It's not meant to be.
Exactly.
Why is it, Chris? Out of all the psychic fairs we've been to, there isn't some old woman there with one of those fortune tellers that's charging £1 or £5 or 20 quid or whatever much it takes for a psychic reading to do one of those. I think they're missing a trick. I think they might be more accurate.
Naughty. You can't say things like that.
So we have another question. Do you guys have personal stories of people magically being smited and how they got on the wrong side of witches? Yes, of course we do. What are we discussing next, Chris?
I wondered how you were going to skip that one.
That?
We do, but those are the sorts of stories we say for the Patreon, mainly because we can't probably legally talk about some of them. This is a little bit too public to be discussing those. What I will say is my best ones, they wrote some really good books about. So they weren't in this lifetime, but I've been fairly well behaved this time round, and I think both of us, until kind of doing this kind of stuff, have kept a pretty low profile, haven't we, Liam? And are still trying to maintain said low profile while doing this. That's why the Patreon exists. Is he disappeared? Is he back?
Yes, I agreed to make someone homeless. But he's a mundane, not a witch. And I said that I would help. I never said I'd do
Exactly.
it for them because they ain't willing to pay the price for it. So I said, I'll help you do it. I do naughty things. I do bad things. Partly because
Yeah, but not kind of smiting level shit, though, really. When was the last time you did smiting level shit? Not recently,
I've been accused
surely.
of removing someone from existence so they never existed in the first place. But I can't get anything that can, actually tell me whether that happened or not. Because even the Morai said they cannot see what hasn't been created yet. So, but they said that the technique that I would have used would have worked. But they can't tell me whether I've used it. And I can't fucking remember. So there's a possibility I might have done that. And I'm not sure how bad that is in the grand scheme of things. Partly because I don't know who it would have been.
I don't know who would have pissed you off enough.
I think it would have been a case of kill or be killed. That would probably be the only reason why I'd do something like that.
Well, that's what I mean. Like,
and I doubt it would have been a person.
You're talking that kind of level, aren't you? Like, that's what we're trying to get at here. Is really how often does that sort of stuff come up? Not really as often as would be exciting. But equally,
no, but we do fuck people over constantly in the magic. So this is low magic. Obviously. This is removing someone's wealth, giving someone a terrible condition, that kind of thing. The stuff that affects the physical body, making someone live a miserable, painful, unhappy, horrible life. That wouldn't be classed as smiting, really.
No.
The closest thing to smiting you would get from a mundane perspective would probably be just killing curses, killing someone.
Oh, I suppose. But I suppose
we're talking from
we have our rules of
level. You're talking about affecting people for multiple lifetimes and doing a proper number over, which you have done, Chris.
Well,
in
I
this
have,
lifetime.
But I don't
we won't talk
do
about
anymore.
That, because that was on one of the Red podcasts where we discussed the naughty things. Our best hits.
Actually, Liam, let's be truthful. That was our intro. Can you handle the light version?
We have to make a part 2 as well. They do want a part 2 for that.
Yeah, they do want a part 2. But yes, obviously, Fausty Witches do Fausty things. But yeah, I don't know. I suppose a large part of it is the fact that, that I was trying to ignore that. The
Alex, he ain't that quiet.
It's not necessary to really go to that length. Very rarely. Or maybe I've just got a better meditation process now. So I
well, you do yoga, don't you, every week?
The yoga stops me from killing people. It's really good.
Shows you out and stops you from smiting
the
people.
Breathing.
Here's a bugbear of mine, one that I struggle with, I suppose. And that's when people come to me, particularly if it's beginners, because it's generally beginners that ask this. How do I protect myself? Can you tell me a way of protecting myself? And I have to think long and hard, because I think you're not asking me what to protect. You're not telling me what you want protection from. You're just saying you want to learn some sort of protection. And it goes to the idea that I just need a really good protective spell that's super powerful, and it will be able to protect against anything. And it don't fucking work like that, I very often will make recommendations, but then with my big mouth that I have, because I'm not the quiet one, apparently, I automatically tell them how they can then undo it if it, So I'm like, oh, there we go. We can create a spiritual magical armor, that sort of thing to protect your astral body. And now I'll just tell you how to get rid of that if you ever come across that. So it's literally moves, counter moves, moves, counter moves. Because of the way we teach, it's always a case of this is the move, this is how you deflect the move, or this is the protective measure, this is how you destroy and get rid of that protective measure. And it just goes on and on and on. So it is very, very difficult to cover that. Generally speaking, in order to take a question like that seriously, because I don't take the question seriously of, Liam, please can you teach me and explain how I might go about protecting myself magically, because that's a terrible question. If you say, how do I protect against this attack? How do I protect against working with this? How do I protect against this from happening? That I can work with because there's context to the question.
Yeah.
I
like
think because I
hypotheticals.
spend too much time on social media with the throwaway statements and questions, I react badly to that kind of line of question in there because it just pisses me the fuck off. And if we're talking about smiting, if I had to cope with too many people asking those very questions, then I might turn around and smite someone. But I've got to stop doing things like that because it's nasty. And I don't want to turn into a bigger monster than I already am.
I think it's one of those subjects that gets a bit old very quickly, which is kind of why we're trying to cover as many bases as we are now, and not talking about protection magic, because you can go back and watch that video. Again, we try to be as bland as you can to kind of cover as many bases, but the tricky thing is a lot of these subjects can't be covered in an hour. And I imagine those that do watch this probably need to watch it more than once to actually taken in some of the things that we're talking about. This is, multiple lifetimes worth of work that we're trying to squeeze.
The hidden codes we've added in that goes over the heads of a lot of people.
Yeah. So how many of our patrons they're on the third or fourth listening to some of the Patreons, and they're still none the wiser on some of the subjects. But it does allow them to ask the right questions. And again, I think we kind of covered this in today's Patreon episode for No Holds Barred. But, is that kind of asking the right questions to kind of make sure that you actually understand what you're asking. Because I think that's what it's not out of ignorance sometimes. I think sometimes it's a case of actually going, you don't realize how much you don't know. And therefore actually the question to you is simple, but the answer is far too complex. At which point you're then going, I need you to be more specific than that, or we're going to spend 6 hours here and only scratch the surface. And I think that's what some people don't quite get. Is depending on the situation, will totally depend on what you're actually asking us here, and what answer we give you is going to be coloured by a myriad of factors. I need a general protection spell is of no use to us whatsoever, because our answer is going to be something silly like, okay, well, if that's the level of your question, go and find yourself some iron horseshoes, because literally that's the level of question you're asking us is, go and make yourself a witch bottle, go and do some of these kind of folk magic level answers are what you're going to get from us, because that's the level of the question you are asking.
Go buy an evil eye pendant.
Yeah. Don't travel anywhere without one. It's you understanding what is the difference between them. And I've got to plug Witchcraft, Witch Wars, for, but also what's going on in the Witchcraft Live, which is why that kind of came out a bit muddled, is with what Lauren's been doing with the kind of setting these mini challenges for us for the people on Witchcraft Live Facebook group. And the last couple have been really interesting. Particular one was this last week's one, I think it was, with the Nazar, the evil eye, and actually getting them to all talk about what do they see, like how far in can they get, how does it work, for them to then understand better how protection magic works. So, you were talking to one of the patrons last week, Liam, about, go and look at some of these folk magics, break them down. How does that work? If you start to then understand how these amulets and these traditional folklore magics work, you'll then kind of be at the next level and be able to kind of go, okay, well, I understand this is how defending against magic works and this level. Where do I look for the next level? And actually, if you kind of approach it from that kind of each time taking yourself a little bit further and a little bit further and a little bit further until you do have the intelligent questions to ask somebody that knows something, or feel that you no longer need to ask the question because actually you've got enough of an understanding to see how this kind of magics works. It kind of goes to the hex to heal that we did with the very first witch wars. Is the more you know about hexing people, the better you get at understanding how to heal them. Or with this, kind of like the more you understand about hexing, the more you'll understand about protecting against hexing, and so forth. Go on,
you'll understand more about protective magic when you start trying to break through other people's protective barriers and magic. So you'll learn more about protective magic when you start undoing protective magic, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Much like you can learn a lot about attack by defense. I've always thought that attack and defense, so attacking and protection, goes hand in hand and should always be learnt together. Because if you're utilizing something like you mentioned, the horseshoe thing, if you're making a magical horseshoe to put on the door, above the door, how are you making this? Then, when you've made it, how would you go about breaking that protection? And when you've learned how you'd break that protection, you can then learn and think how to improve that protection so that it can't be broken, and go on and on and on until such a point that you reach that it's kind of impractical and pointless because you've actually made that protective measure a lot more powerful, and it kind of reaches its end point. Like with something like this folk magic charm, you can add more energy to it, you can get to work in various different places and different ways, but ultimately the mere methodology of using this and protecting a space in the physical world dies past a certain point, because you could utilize magic somewhere else that's going to have effect, not trying to penetrate the barrier, but where it's already inside of it. If you're trying to protect your family and you think a good way of doing that is stopping anything from coming in the house, well, you just affect parts of that family that are outside of the house. They might be physically in the house, but their energetic parts will be in other realities, essentially, in various other places. We've got another question, I think. What about directing your attacks on people outside of the person attacking you? Like utilizing a third party, a person, not a spirit, to harass the target versus you just sending on the curse back to them. Yeah, so you're talking about, what's the legal term with that? Being an accessory to murder? So you're saying go and get a spirit to do it for you, or go and get another magical practitioner to do it for you, or basically making it look like someone else is doing it. So we talked a little bit about masks and creating a persona that if anything does get directed back, it breaks, and it happens to be the persona, the puppet that you're utilizing, acting your magic through a puppet, through an avatar, so that anything that gets sent back hits the avatar or hits the puppet. Then that's a brilliant means of protecting yourself, which a lot of people don't realize, they don't understand. But of course, that can still be bested. You can still, it's not the be all and the end all. It can still be compensated for. But obviously it would require the person who is, if say you attacked someone, say I attacked Chris magically, and I utilized some sort of mask or intermediary. Chris then fired his, or sent the spell or hex or whatever is back, and it hit that intermediary. Then it's not going to hurt me. But what if Chris has the ability and decides to really take a look, and his psychic skills are such, and ability is such that he can see through that mask, and he knows it's a mask, because he's got that level of knowledge and ability. Then he's going to be able to think, okay, I can see the mask, I'm going to work through that mask, or I'm going to keep pushing until I break through that mask and continue on further. Again, it's basically outdoing your opponent when it comes to attack and defense.
So to go with the mask idea a little bit further and just kind of point out, so it's understanding what's connected to that mask. How well equipped are you for creating masks? Are you able to create a mask that has no energy signature of yours at all? Or is it a case of there are so many decoys that they couldn't find necessarily the original? It really depends on what section of the Art of War you're actually reading at the time. But it is a case of you understanding what is that mask, what's its purpose, and how does your magic interact with it. So, is it a deflection, and therefore, or like Liam said, can that be traced back to you? Because again, what are the ways in which people could go around said mask? As Liam said earlier, it is all about moves and counter moves, which is very Defense Against the Dark Arts. So, from J.K. Rowling's point of view, it is all about kind of moves and counter moves. What we're talking about is that there is a level at which you reach where it's no longer counter moves and moves. You're talking about who's got more power or who's got more knowledge.
It's an arm wrestling match at that point.
Yeah. And depending on the day, it could depend, on what access you've got at that time. And understanding those levels of magic, comes with time. But yeah, up until that point, you're still talking about.
Yeah, it works a lot like a VPN, I suppose, like when you're talking computer language. But you could have various VPNs, so using something like Tor, for example, where you connect to different servers, and then you can trace it back to the first one, but not the second or the third or the fourth or however. But of course you can, because it can be done. It's just whether the person has that ability to be able to do that. I thought they were asking about like turning their spouse or children against the target instead of going after the target directly. So psychologically, of course, you could.
That's nice.
Use something like that. So you could say, well, I don't really fancy beating that person up because they're stronger, but if I get someone else that's stronger than them and sow the seeds and manipulate them into doing it for me, then potentially. So what you could do is you could use magic on someone else to send them after them. But this really, again, the flawed process with that is it's much like your stereotypical film. You have a goodie and you have a baddie, and the baddie has a team. It's always pretty much the same in all these films. The goodie has to beat all of the baddies up to get to the big boss baddie. But the big boss baddie utilizes all these little baddies to do their work. But what you need to remember is big boss baddies only be able to affect little baddies. I.e., if the big boss baddie isn't capable of defeating the hero, their little cronies ain't going to be able to do it. They're just buying time. If you want to see an example of that, watch my favorite film of all time, Kill Bill. And that's one possibility for sure, but not only.
Yeah,
yeah.
I must
So I'm
say,
not
I do
entirely.
like the Faustiness of that approach, in the sense that you know, well, they're not going to surely attack their lovely family as the intermediary. That again, like Liam says, in a lot of ways, can be a buying time situation, while you come up with a better solution. Again, moves and counter moves, but yeah, it is a very Fausty answer from you there, Dina. Of
So another
actually
thing, I
using the meat
suppose,
suit.
if you personally can't get to your enemy, because you'll find this also in films and that, if you can't get to the enemy, then just take out everything that enemy loves. So if you aren't able to defeat the person, but you're aware of people or things that the person loves, then go indirectly. Go after the things that they care about, like the kind of concept of, I can't defeat you, but I'm gonna kidnap a victim like your child and point a gun to their head, and you'd better do what I say or I'll shoot type thing. Very often does work. However, remember, like on some films, they might do some crazy ass magical jujitsu martial artsy moves and, throw a dagger which blocks the gun or something like that, or does some next level shit. I don't know. Magically speaking, you could be doing something like that. So I'd just be a little bit careful of taking on someone that's way above your pay grade, essentially. Because you might think you've got a good idea and a good approach to doing that, but you might think you've worked out all the moves, but then all of a sudden,
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where people, as you're getting to those sorts of levels, when you're having to think beyond yourself, where you're actually thinking, oh, okay, what soft targets are there around me? That really does make me sound like a complete psychopath by calling them soft targets. But the what is available? Where are your weaknesses? I think some people do forget that their weakness isn't necessarily something that could happen to them, and is actually something that could happen to the people around them. Go on, Liam.
Gogo Yubari from Kill Bill did not almost do the job. She didn't almost do the job. If you look at the training that Uma Thurman, the bride, whatever we're calling her, had, she was always going to beat Gogo. It looked rough for a time, but I mean, the very fact that Gogo was ever so overconfident to not even bother to think that plank of wood with the nails going out of it could be reached, it goes to not underestimating your enemy. And a lot of people do underestimate their enemies, and a go-go is the I think the type of mentality to do that. That's the problem. And you will meet magical practitioners that also fall into that, that category, where you underestimate someone. But at the end of the day, the problem is, if you're actually trying to attempt to best them, then they might play fight and they might lose because they're not really taking it seriously. We get shit. I know I do. It gets shit sent to me by fucking would-be witches and the like that don't like me or don't stand for what we are doing and that kind of thing. And I kind of brush it off, Every now and again, I might let something in to have a little play about with it. But, I'm not actively trying. The whole thing about all of the bad luck and stuff like that, if I really wanted to, I could fix it, let's be fair. But I don't feel threatened enough to deal with it. So with regards to some of these kind of things with defensive mechanisms, there are a lot of people, such as myself, who just don't care enough to defend against something, going around all day in armor and magical protections and stuff like that is only useful for a certain extent. Now, talking a little bit
It's
of
also
a side note,
exhausting.
we'll just finish on this. I used to, because I've always said and recommended to people that you should put up magical protections and defenses and the like that's relevant to you and the work you do. Now, I used to do a lot of slightly higher level work than teaching, so it was necessary for me to do that. It's the equivalent of wearing Kevlar if you're a bodyguard. It makes sense. You're supposed to be taking a bullet at some point. It makes sense. When I started doing teaching and stuff, I found that dealing with beginners, the level of protection that I'd have, if they accidentally, and many do, make mistakes, send energy, something like that, try something out, is the equivalent of if you have a 5-year-old play fighting with you and punching you. They don't hurt, but if you reacted in such a way because you've got mechanisms that lock into place that automatically deal with any threat like that, is the equivalent of involuntarily when that 5-year-old punches your arm, you turn around and knocking him out, which is going to kill him if it's a 5-year-old. So you'll find that people in teaching positions, such as us, we tend to make sure that we don't have very sophisticated or strong mechanisms in place, because when you're dealing with other people and when you're around other people, that can look threatening and scary, but also interacting with magical practitioners, you do brush against people, you do brush up against people, you do occasionally, do a little thing that will piss someone off or fuck people over. I do it, okay? And it's not meant to be painful, it's just banter. There's such a thing as banter within magic, and I'm not talking verbally, I'm talking you throw a little bit of something their way, just to say that wasn't nice. It's like when you punch your mate on the arm and you do it fairly lightly, but it's just enough to make them go ow. You're not actually trying to hurt
You're
them.
being
You're
a
just
dick
trying
now. Stop it. Yeah.
Is there any others? Or a stalker, or really any kind of obsessive abusive person? I'm not too sure what that relates to. The largest weakness when speaking of minions, though, is that most big baddies don't know that in sheer numbers the minions could potentially win, and they make for a great distraction if all turned out at once. Again, not really, no.
One of the scenes from Kill Bill.
Yeah, one of the scenes from Kill Bill. She pretty much killed all of them in Kill Bill. What was it? The crazy 88? 88 of them all dead.
Yeah, crazy 88. I couldn't think what they were called then.
Which this is something that has come up before. If you have a big bad witch, powerful witch, how many shitty little witches does it take to counteract that big bad witch? The answer are an infinite amount, because if they are, if you get to an intermediate level, it will take an infinite amount of beginners or foundational people to, because that's literally the stepping stones here. It's not like a stepping stone and then you go from one to the other to another. There's huge divides that just get bigger and bigger and bigger between each stepping stone. So with regards to that kind of thing, I'd say no, because if we're talking about films and revenge films and martial arts films and stuff like that, you see it kind of play out. But if you're talking magic, you are talking about being able to see things preemptively. So you're talking about if something comes in, a witch is going to be able to tell that is coming before the other magical practitioner even starts. So if you're saying a load of minions are coming and you've got a little minion making machine that just keeps pumping out more and more, so they keep going and going and going, and more advanced practitioners are going to destroy the minion making machine. They might not destroy you, they might destroy the minion making machine, or more than likely they're going to turn those minions, like in the Terminator films, reprogram them to, ironically, I mean, it's the sort of thing I would do, poetic justice, to turn on their owner, so it's not. It is, at the end of the day, it's power. We say that, coming back to it, is power and ingenuity. And it is a difficult one, defensive magic. I think we've got one last one, because we've gone over time. I'm guessing it has to do with one's own level, but how best figure out the level of a practitioner attacking you or someone else if you don't know them? That's an interesting and difficult question. What about using a Frodo to take out Sauron, sending someone at that they would never think to expect? So this goes down to underestimating your enemy. And let's be fair, in the Lord of the Rings film, Sauron wasn't particularly powerful. Just wasn't. Used mainly manipulation.
No. To kind of answer Amelie's.
Yeah. So if I pop that one back up.
I'm going to try and go with a short answer, but I think it's something that we probably should deal with as a separate subject at some point, because it's a really good question.
We should do a power level or something like that episode where we just take this subject and go into deep detail, because it's a really interesting concept of, because they do it in things like Star Wars, don't they? They have different levels, and like they say Yoda was like a level 9 or something, you know.
Yeah. So the kind of short answer is really good psychic ability, and by that I don't mean predicting the future level. What I mean is being able to see and sense the energy levels we're talking about, and but also bearing in mind that actually lots of us suppress our energy levels to go by as mundane. So, you know, it is really being able to see on the level that you're talking about suppression. For most of your basic annoyances, seeing them energetically is going to be enough, because, like we said, the sorts of Hail Mary kind of people we're talking about are a few and far between, because most people on a particularly interesting path at an interesting level are not going to be interested in you. So unless you're inadvertently going around pissing the wrong people off for no apparent reason. But yeah, so the kind of simple answer to that is really good understanding of energy and being able to see the energy levels. You shouldn't need to know them to know what's going on. You should be able to pull on that string of energy that comes from that spell is attached to, and be able to follow that all the way back to its owner, and be able to read that energy signature, and know and figure out enough about that energy signature to respond accordingly. Anything you want to add, Liam? In short,
imagine you have a multi-story car park where all of the floors and ceilings are made out of one-way glass. And if you're at the top, you can see straight through that one-way glass all the way to the bottom. But if you're at the bottom, all you see is a mirror, because one-way glass, so you just see it reflected. You will be able to really see everyone on the level below you. You have to take the risk with someone that is on your level, and you will not be able to see past the level that you're on. So if you're on level 3, you can see everyone on level 3 and level 2 and level 1. None of the people on level 1 or 2 can see you, but you can look below. You can't see any higher either, and you don't know, technically, if I'm really running with this, you don't know the people that are currently on level 3, whether they've only made it to level 3 or they're also on all the other levels as well. We will dive into that concept in a bigger way, but that's a basic construct for you to mull over and think about. That'll be great. And what's the last one? I suppose that's why energy dampening is popular with witches and other magical practitioners. Can't attack what you can't see or understand. Energy dampening is never really used for protection. energy dampening is used for etiquette, so politeness, etiquette, and for so that you don't basically get people attracted to you and bothering you. So essentially, invisibility to go unnoticed is not used necessarily as a protective measure. It's more used for
low profile,
keeping a low profile to people that you don't really want to have to deal with. So with that perspective, breaking that down is a case of if you went to a gathering of witches and you didn't want to have to deal with the beginner witches, you would shield yourself that the beginner witches don't see the energy emanating from you. But all of the advanced witches will be able to. So it means that it's not protection, remember, it's a case of going unnoticed so that you don't get annoyed by things. And I'm not just talking about going to a moot and shielding yourself from other witches that you don't want to have to deal with because you don't like them. I'm talking about shielding yourself from things that you don't want to have to deal with that are less advanced than you or weaker than you, hence why they'll fall for such a simple piece of magic. Energy dampening for etiquette works on a similar process. It's a case of if you were having a nice dinner and inviting people to dinner, it might be a bit uncomfortable for a random person to show up with weapons, Kevlar, all of that, suited and booted, that looks like they're about to go and raid a third world country. You know, someone going into that environment, like you leave your sword at the door. Someone going into an environment where it's at past a certain level, you should be able to control the energy that emanates from you and all of that sort of thing, which means that past a certain level, if you're pushing that out there or allowing that to go out there, you're making a fucking statement. Okay. So it's a case of etiquette would say being loud and rash and throwing all of that out there might be seen by some, not everyone, but it might be seen as some as potentially rude. People that maybe aren't as strong as what you're emanating as well. It's kind of like peacocking, I think they call it, don't they? Pigeon chesting, you know? It's basically like the magical equivalent of that, which it would be considered rude to do, you know? I would say it's rude to do, which is why aura suppression is, I think, an important part of public magical gatherings and such. But yeah, we have gone way over time. So is there anything else we need to cover, Chris?
No, I think it's given some opportunities for future work, definitely.
Okay. Well, we'll call it a night then, and I've got to go and edit the podcast that's coming out tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, Alex, much like a vulgar display of power. That's very good. I like that. So goodbye for another week.
If you're tired of all the neo-pagan claptrap that's on the internet and want to see some real witchcraft, please subscribe to the Thoth TV YouTube channel. If you really want to kick things up a notch, try clicking the No Holds Barred podcast link.